For it, I welcome Irene Tinagli, Italian economist and politician who has been serving as member of the European Parliament since 2019 as chairwoman of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. She also serves on the Conference of Committee Chairs, the Subcommittee on Tax Matters, and is a member of the Delegation for Relations with the United States. Dragos Paslaru, Romanian economist and politician, has also been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2019, as a member of Renew Europe and in the Romanian Freedom, Unity and Solidarity Party. Mr. Paslaru has previously held the position of Minister of Labour, Family, Social Protection and the Elderly in the Romanian government. Neil Richmond, an Irish Fine Gael politician who has been an Irish MP for the Dublin-Rathdale constituency since the 2020 general election. He has previously served as a senator for the Labour panel, as an advisor in the European Parliament, and as a projects manager for the not-for-profit sector. Finally, it is a pleasure to introduce Joe Lynham, BBC World Service broadcaster, who will be chairing this panel. The BBC's senior business correspondent for a decade, Mr. Lynham has covered the financial crisis, the Eurozone crisis, and more recently, the economic and political fallout from the Brexit referendum. Throughout the discussion, please send your questions in using Slido, and we also have a poll open, also available on Slido, which we'd love you to participate in. I turn now to Mr. Lynham to start this panel debate. Over to you.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you very much. And welcome to this very special panel, the final day of the Warwick Economics Summit. For those of you who missed the previous session with the former Irish President, Mary Robinson, you missed a treat. I'm sure it'll be put up online for all of you to have a look in due course. We certainly hope to keep up the quality and the momentum with a lively discussion here entitled COVID-19 and European Unity. And it's been made possible by the European Parliament. The last time we did this was January the 30th last year, a night Britain formally left the European Union. It was a poignant and for some a very traumatic and melancholy moment, and one of joy for others. We did that live and in front of a packed audience in Warwick University. That seems such a treat these days. Little did we know that a massive global pandemic would lock us in our homes and shut down our entire European economy. But it did, and we're still locked down for many of us and still counting the human and financial cost of the coronavirus. I want to take this time to remember all the hundreds of thousands of Europeans that have died and have had their lives dramatically affected by the coronavirus. I do hope that the virus, which has devastated our lives, will be swept away by the vaccine, which is now being injected into millions of European arms as we speak. We want to talk today about whether the virus highlighted divisions within the EU, now down to 27 member states, or whether it sped up integration and deepened the links between countries. And given the rows that the Commission has been in with Pfizer and AstraZeneca concerning the distribution of the vaccine, the timing of this discussion could not be more appropriate. We have an amazing panel and we want you to take part in it as well. As Izzy was talking to you, there is going to be a poll as well, which we're going to kind of repeat very shortly, so you can take part in that. There'll be two polls, in fact, one little bit later on. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to set out their position on COVID-19 and European unity. After that, I'll ask a few questions. Your questions via Slido will be put to them. We're using the hashtag WES 2021 for social media. So if you're tweeting or LinkedIning or Facebooking, hashtag WES 2021 or hashtag join the debate. Everything is on the record. I hope we have Neil Richmond, because we're going to go to him first. Neil Richmond is a member of the Irish Parliament, or TD, Teachta Dála, as they are known as. Neil is with the centrist Fine Gael party, which stands for Tribe of the Irish. And before being elected to represent the relatively well-off area in South Dublin, he was a senator in Ireland's upper house, where he often did battle against pro-Brexit commentators. And only last week, or the week before, he ensured that the anti-EU group Leave.eu was suspended after it moved its registration to Ireland after Britain formally left the single market. Neil, the virtual floor, hopefully you can hear me, is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's nice to be called a centrist. In my own country, I'm called hard right, and that'll just give you a flavour of what the Irish Parliament looks like at the moment. But I very much do consider myself a centrist in the traditional European Christian democratic approach. But it's a wonderful opportunity to join this panel with two brilliant MEPs, and indeed yourself, Joe, and more importantly, the audience who have had a wonderful opportunity this weekend. I'm going to cut straight to it because I know we only have a couple of minutes, and it's really interesting that I'm joining a panel brought to us by the European Parliament with two of the most respected MEPs across the institution, but I'm very much here as a member state parliamentarian, and I think that's really something that has to be at the heart of the discussion, any discussion, when we talk about European unity and the state of the union as such. It's really, really important to move the conversation away from Brussels, from Strasbourg, from the Schuman bubble, as so many people know it as. And I can say that because I worked in the bubble. I spent a couple of years on the Committee of the Regions, and I really still consider myself an ultimate pro-European. But while some people in certain media organisations would like to say that COVID has put a threat to the European Union, Brexit has put a threat to the European Union, it is very much my opinion that this is just how the European Union works. The European Union was born as a reaction of crisis. As Jean Monnet said, the European Union is always dealing with various crises. And that can start from the recovery of the Second World War to the collapse of communism to facing a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in a century. And what we want to see very much from a member state parliamentary point of view is really taking back ownership of what the EU has done very well. And my colleagues will talk about the European Recovery Fund, and I'm going to allow them to do that. But one of the areas that a lot of people try to heighten up tensions about is the vaccine programme. Now, I'm coming to you this afternoon, Joe, from Dublin, one of the smaller member states of the EU in Ireland. And if it wasn't for the EU, would Ireland been able to get their hands on any vaccines, let alone the option to buy from 5 different distributors? The quantities that when they do get here in the coming months, and we've already vaccinated over 200,000 people, the quantities will be massive and done in a manner that we can afford. Quite simply, a country with a population of just over 4 million, we wouldn't have been able to afford that. And then when we look at the other solidarity and the images that are so striking for me, even in this continual third lockdown phase as we're enjoying or dealing with in Ireland, is the European practical solidarity. German doctors going down to Portugal, Irish ambulance drivers going across the border into Northern Ireland, Romanian doctors going to Italy, as my panelists will have only known too well, my co-panelists. And I think that's something that's at the heart of it. But there is two questions that you put very succinctly. Does this highlight the divisions, or does this speed up integration? And given that we're belatedly having the conversation on the future of Europe, I think that what has been revealed is the lack of European competence when it comes to health. And perhaps I think the result of this will indeed be a speeding up the integration.
Neil, Goramagat, and a big extra thank you for you, because I know you're a massive rugby fan and Ireland is playing a very big rugby game as we speak. So if I see your eyes averted or you yelp in the air or something like that, I'll know what has gone on, and I will agree heartily with your celebrations. Stay with this. Let's go to Italy now, another European nation going through political turmoil these days. Mario Draghi, the former head of the European Central Bank, no less, someone who's never been elected to public office, looks set to become the prime minister there. Let's go to Irene Tignali, the Italian economist and an MEP and chair of the very powerful Econ Committee of the European Parliament. She has the honor of getting more votes than any other female candidate in the 2019 elections. Before coming to Brussels, she was an advisor to Italian ministers of culture, education and justice. Benvenuto, Irene.
Buon pomeriggio.
Grazie. Go ahead.
Yes, so I think this pandemic, as Neil just recalled, was an opportunity for Europe to, stick together and find what really created the European Union, what really brings us together. And it was not easy. We shouldn't give this unity for granted. We need to work for it. It's not easy in a time of difficulty, in a time where, the temptation of closing up and defending our own small garden is strong, and actually open up and say, you know what, we are in this all together. This is a global and European crisis, and we need to help each other because that's how we should deal with it. And of course, there have been challenges. It was not easy because, as Neil recalled, the European Union, European institutions, they, in some cases, like in healthcare, they don't have the powers to really intervene. And even in some economic, issues, we don't have that kind of power. We didn't have the kind of budget at the beginning to intervene. So we had to be creative. We had to think about what kind of tools we can put in place as fast as possible to support member states. So for example, in March, we started at the very beginning the debate when we realized that was a real European crisis, thinking about how we can help and support member states to put in place all the economic instruments that they need to deploy. So we started by activating the escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, which many member states thought it was too tight and it wouldn't allow them to spend what they really needed to spend. We entered a new framework for state aid to have member states support businesses that were in a tremendous crisis due to a completely exogenous factor, not for their own fault. Then we intervened by using the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, which was what we had at the moment. Maybe it was not the ideal instrument, but that was what available at the time. And we knew that we had a potential pool of 400 billion euros to put in place. And we decided to devote more than half of it for a special pandemic program that could support healthcare expenditure in member states. And then we came up with the Recovery and Resilience Facility within the broader program of the Next Generation EU. All of these were steps towards a greater integration. The difficulty was trying to push for a greater integration within the treaties that we had, that are treaties that are limited and limit our powers. But the will, the political will, the feel of solidarity and the need to intervene pushes us to be creative and innovative. And of course, we still have a lot of challenges ahead. I mean, we know that. We know that, for example, having created this Next Generation EU, which will rely upon a European debt of 750 billion euros of bonds that will be issued by the Commission, this will require to be repaid. And this means that the member states will have to be really close and work closely together to make it work. Now it's upon each one of us to make sure that these instruments will work properly. And this can only be done if we increase the degree of coordination and cooperation, not less. So, of course, I know these challenges. So many people think we've approved, the Council approved the Next Generation EU, and now it's done. We made our step forward. I think this is just the beginning, and we will need to keep moving and also monitor to make sure that this will work. And because I believe that solidarity, of course, is at the basis of the European Union. It is the basis of the responses that we gave to the COVID crisis. But solidarity needs to be accompanied by responsibility on each of us. Each one side has to respond with responsibility and cooperation. So, of course, we will have a lot of challenges, but I think we are moving in the right direction. And I hope we keep in this direction and we resist the temptation, because, of course, the road is long and bumpy. There will be moments in which things don't work as we expected. Like we had bumps along the vaccination road. We are dealing with it. It was the first time that the European Union was trying to adopt this centralized approach. We did it exactly for the same reason that Neil recalled, to make sure that even the smallest states could access the vaccines, and we could put together all the efforts to have the necessary negotiating power to allow every single European citizen to access the vaccine, regardless of how big or small the country they live in is. So we know there will be bumps, but we will need to stick together and address these bumps with the faith and confidence that we'll be able to overcome it.
Okay, grazie Irene, grazie. Now, I will be mentioning the poll in due course after Dragos has said a few words. You've already been voting on it, and you can continue to vote on that poll in due course. We will have two in the course of our debate. Let's bring in someone now from the eastern flank of the European Union, from Romania. Dragos Pislaru is a member of the PLUS or PLUS party in Romania and part of the Renew group, which is linked to President Macron in the European Parliament. An economist by training, Dragos sits on the Employment and Econ committees, so is very familiar with Irena, I'm sure, who sits in the chair. He has been working on creating a pan-European pension, as well as Romania joining the euro. Dragos, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe. I would like to salute my chair from the Econ Committee, Irene, and
no brown nosing, no brown nosing.
Yeah, exactly. And Neil, great speech, and glad to be here with you in this panel. I mean, if there is one lesson we ought to have by now, is that we are stronger together, that there are threats that we can only tackle as a union. This is something the pandemic has not only reminded us, but actually made us apply in practice. In 2020, by the time the pandemic started, member states had implemented only half of the recommendation of the Commission addressing them in the European semester. This means half health systems prepared, social protection mechanism only half effective, economies half strong and sustainable if we are to think about the European dimension. This means a future half bright for our next generation. I mean, this led to concerns about the rapidity of the recovery and resilience capacity that we are putting together in Europe. And we really need to be more resilient when the next crisis is going to come, because it will come. With this in mind, this Recovery and Resilience Facility was created. I mean, this is the largest financial instrument the EU has ever created. And I was honored to be the co-rapporteur for the European Parliament. And I see this solution indeed of preserving our unity in the Union. I mean, we have this instrument, and I can assure that I'm already very proud of its potential, complexity, and vision following the negotiations. Now, we have two possible outcomes. We do this right. That means that we build the needed resilience and that will allow us to face future challenges without posing a threat to European unity, or we fail. And if we fail, not only the EU will be far from unity, but we also, this actually is going to pose a threat for one of our core values, democracy. The erosion of our democracy would be inevitable, the damage. I mean, that would be enormous as a damage. So we are economists here, but actually the stake, it's not only about the economy, it's about the democratic values that we are actually so, attached to. And there are three arguments for that very, very quickly. So first of all, we are dealing with long overdue reforms. And one of the positive outcomes of having an instrument such as the RRF is that this is actually a good starting point for those things that we've actually left there and we didn't tackle as structural reforms, as, things related to modernizing our health systems, consolidating education system, making the public administration more transparent, education systems more digitalized, and environment more green. So these are actually, critical things that we said, yes, we are going to do it, and so on. I remember, the innovation plans that Europe has actually, put together each, 5 or 6 years, and unfortunately the results were not there. So as a long-term ambition, it's if our economies not only recover, but manage to thrive in the upcoming decade, I mean, we will see a proper banking union, a capital market union in a strong and enlarged Eurozone. And all these may actually be triggered right now by the RRF, because it was actually, a mutual view on having debts together and so on. Second thing, new industrial strategy. I mean, through the RRF, the money is on the table to do all the things related to, our vision to become a global actor and have the European value added and pan-European projects and innovation. And, look at the vaccine race, solving this complicated puzzle related to the supply chains behind the vaccination process. I mean, that's exactly the new kind of stuff that we want to put together for the new industrial policy of the EU. So we will actually successfully do that, together. And last but not least, solidarity indeed. This has actually been reminded by Irene as well. And I think that we have also responsibilities that are going outside the economic realm, and digital transformation and green transition must go hand in hand with social cohesion. Otherwise, we will risk losing the trust of the European citizens. And data from opinion polls shows that the trust in EU is at 43%. So it's not that huge. So we need to show the European citizens that we are working for them, and they have been quite patient, the citizens, with us, and they have been waiting for answers and for delivering on those answers. And I think that this is actually very, very important. And I'm actually going to quote FRA Director Michael O'Flaherty, in a hearing in Ample Committee, said, "The society is only as strong as are its most vulnerable groups." And I think that this is really important for the future. And I would dare to add that the society is the strongest when the next generation, which means you, the ones that are listening to us right now, the ones that are currently, engaged in shaping the society, are stronger. So in the end, our unity stands on values and moving forward together. Right now, moving forward, it's really about these three elements: deepening reforms, new strategy for industry, and economics with the social perspectives. And I think that the RRF has come as a response to a major crisis in a pandemic, but it's setting the ground for us to go from theorizing about these three elements to transforming them into reality. Thank you.
Mulțumesc, Dragos. I wish my Romanian was as good as your English. Just to remind you about how you can ask your questions on the Slido on the right-hand side. Hashtag is WES 2021 or hashtag join the debate. The first poll question, a lot of you have already voted, is just get you thinking. And I saw Dragos talking about approval towards the European Union at 43%. This is related to this. The poll question is, how strong would you say European unity was before the virus struck on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 means total and complete unity, and of course that is a pipe dream, and 0 means they couldn't agree on anything, absolutely nothing, whether you wanted tea or coffee, they couldn't agree on anything. So the vote has been ongoing, and based on what we've got so far, 6 out of 10 seems to be the most popular result. So 6 out of 10 people are on the scale that I gave of 0 to 10, 6 out of 10, 28% have voted for that. I will be coming back to a second poll question, but I'm going to put that very same question to our panel. How would you rate European unity before the virus struck? Irena.
It was not, I think it was better than we thought. And we had the proof when the COVID crisis, arrived. I think that before it was like 5, and now we are like 8 to 9.
Okay, I love short answers. Neil Richmond, you worked in the bubble. You're now in the Irish political bubble. We've seen what I could only regard as, if I put it nicely, a mess up by the Commission in terms of the vaccine a week and a half ago, when there was talk about shutting the border between both parts of the island of Ireland. Where would you regard European unity before, as in, let's say, January 1st, exactly 12 months ago, when this storm was about to hit us?
Yeah, I think the important thing to take into account, Joe, that European unity, it kind of gets broken down into what the issue is. So over Brexit, yeah, it was 100%. But what about the rule of law? What about, the fiscal four and the pre-budget and the CAP, and from an Irish point of view, Mercosur? So I think on fair, I'd be a little bit more optimistic than Irena, saying overall it was probably about 6 out of 10. And despite a 5-hour, I don't know, is Horlicks a well enough used term, but you'd appreciate that, Joe, a 5-hour absolute disaster from the European Commission last week.
There are far worse language to use, Neil.
Yeah.
Horlicks would be a nice way of some people described it.
Well, people can appreciate
a mistake.
A very bad mistake, because it wasn't a little mistake, and particularly not for those of us on this island. And what it has done is it ceded the moral high ground that the European Union and member states had maintained in the Brexit discussion for the past 5 years. And that was leapt upon by the Brexiteer media, and advantages being taken by unionist politicians in Northern Ireland mistakenly. But it was a 5-hour mistake. So I think people need to be a bit more realistic of where we are. But that aside, I would fundamentally believe that Europe is far more united now than it was a year ago. I'd say it's gone from 6 out of 10 right up to 7.5. As you say, 10 out of 10 is impossible. 9 out of 10 is more or less impossible. So 7.5 is pretty good.
Okay, Dragos, where do you think it was before the crisis struck?
I mean, I'm coming from Eastern Europe, and for Romania, the accession to the EU was actually a major historical chance. So I am, and Romanians are very pro-European because of that. So for us, I mean, having the chance of joining the club, you know, meant that we believed from, you know, at least from the exterior before getting in, that the unity would be an 8 at least. And then when we actually entered and we've seen the malaise going on for some years, I mean, culminating with Brexit, I think that we went down to about, you know, 6, I would say. There was a, you know, a hype over the Green Deal thing, which, you know, basically put it, you know, 6.5, 7. And then when the crisis started, I mean, let's remember that the dark moments at the beginning of the crisis with all the countries shutting down the borders. That was 4, I would say, and then coming back, you know, swiftly with the reaction of the Union, with the, you know, economic packages, with the SURE and the things that Irene have actually mentioned. And so we jumped, I would say at that moment, I would say at a 7. And I would say right now we did, you know, the vaccine thing and the, you know, the health programs, the EU for health and so on. We are probably up to 8. Again, I'm telling you that I'm more idealistic or optimistic, but I would say that if we keep the pace and also with the RRF implementation and so on, we might actually stay at an 8 for a while.
Can I stay with you, Dragos? We saw plenty of coronavirus nationalism at the start of the crisis. Let's talk about, you know, March or April, when countries shut down the borders entirely between European member states, including the Schengen area. I just wonder whether the Schengen area can be ever fully restored after what we saw 9 months ago.
I believe that we have a chance to reinvent quite a few things. If we take Schengen as it is right now, we see that some countries are not in Schengen for political reasons. I mean, it's not the case that Romania has not been deemed, for instance, technically capable of, you know, defending the borders and so on. So I can add another nail in the coffin of the Schengen, if you want, from this particular perspective. I would dare to say that we will see a revamped Schengen, and that would mean also, in my view, a revamped MCV. You know, that is the you know, the mechanism for cooperation and in terms of justice and so on, and rule of law. So I'm actually optimistic that Schengen is not dead, and it's not going to be you know, less efficient, but it will actually be right now the scope of revamping it and you know, reasserting the values behind it.
Irina, Germany slapped an export ban on PPE, personal protective equipment, at the start of this crisis. That absolutely infuriated Italians, n'est-ce pas?
Yeah. But you mean at the beginning?
Yeah, this is March and April, when Italy was being devastated by the virus, and Germany said no PPE can leave Germany, even if it's bound for Italy.
Well, of course, that came like a shock, and actually we saw other blocks and you know, closures in other countries. But I think that you know, that was short-lived. I mean, and then we had the reaction, as Dragos said. I think that even the leaders realized that every single country would start going down that road. The European Union would break. Because it would have been, you know, meaning breaking the basis on which we have created the European Union, the solidarity, the openness, the sharing. So the free circulation, I mean, the single market, for God's sake, it's even beyond the values, it's even in our treaties, the single market and the free circulation of goods and people. So I think, as I said,
was it a mistake, Irina? Sorry to interrupt you, but was it a mistake by Berlin?
Absolutely, it was. I think it was a mistake. I don't think it was in a bad faith. I think that the crisis at the beginning took everything, aback, and nobody really knew exactly how to react to this. There were, of course, fears and worries on the side of the population, a scarcity of these equipments. I mean, it's possible that at the very beginning there are these kind of responses. That was a wrong response. But the good news is that eventually we realized the first thing where everyone in the European Union realized what shouldn't be done, what is wrong. And then we managed to react to that. And actually, I would like to remind that Germany was probably the country that, one of the first countries that decided that we should back the proposal of a recovery plan, and the one who managed to bring all the others along. So, I mean, I don't want to blame on Germany. I think that Berlin had a wrong answer at that moment, but I also understand that was at the very beginning and it was a tough moment. But I also believe that Germany realized how important it would be actually to have a united response, and also to be generous, because of course we have to remind ourselves that Germany will be the biggest contributor to the next generation EU. So,
how surprised? Irene, how surprised were you that after 20 years of saying nein und nimmer, that Germany agreed to debt mutualization, to share borrowing with, let's put it this way, weaker member states or less well-off member states, after 20 years of saying no way?
I think that, maybe now we've forgotten, but there were moments where we really saw images that were close to a war or post-war scenario. We saw deaths, and we saw coffins along the streets, mass graves. We saw things like that, and I think it was clear that was nobody's fault. There was not a weakness in the economic policy, in the fiscal policy. That was a pandemic. That was an exogenous factor that hit the countries. Some of them were hit worstly first at the beginning, and I think that this reminded us that was not the time to point fingers and find whose fault it is, because it was nobody's fault. So I think this pushes the feeling of solidarity and helped understanding that we needed a response. Let's also remind ourselves that so far, at the moment, the Next Generation EU is a temporary program. So it is, we are not yet at a point where it's not an undistinct share of debt. It's sharing a piece of debt that countries will make to face the pandemic. So I think these also helped, convincing the public opinion in countries like Germany or other countries that this was something related to an exogenous factor and was not condoning behavior or mistakes from some other countries. So I think that it's very precise and is also related to something that was really enormous and was nobody's fault.
Neil Richmond, member of the Irish Parliament, can I bring you in on this this momentous step taken by Germany, especially, with other countries as well, obviously the Netherlands and the Finns, of sharing borrowing. Ireland, as you know, needed a bailout 10 years ago. I'm quite proud of the role that I played as a journalist in revealing that story. But at the time, a lot of Irish people were livid with the fact that they were lumbered with these huge debts from banks that have gone bust, and they didn't get the support that they wanted. How significant is the decision to mutualize debt, even if it is for a short-term COVID recovery plan?
I think it's hugely significant, Joe, and I think it's hugely important. And it's one of the huge things that has come out of this. Everyone talks about crisis and the difficulty, but out of every crisis presents an opportunity. And these Eurobonds are a massive opportunity. And when you saw them floating on the New York Stock Exchange, this is a huge step forward for the Union. But just to tie into your initial comments there, and indeed a lot of what Irina has said, the easiest thing that any of us can do is look to blame in a pandemic. You want to blame the Germans for holding on to PPE. Ireland could have done the same with ventilators. People want to blame travel. They want to blame cafes. They want to blame restaurants. They want to blame people going to nightclubs or illegal raves. You're dealing with a pandemic, the likes of which that hasn't been seen in a century. It's brutal. It's horrific. It's ruined lives. It's ended lives. And when we're talking then about the other side, about debt equalizations, we also go back to blame 10 years ago. And you know this better than anyone else in this panel, Joe, about, you know, what was Ireland doing domestically as economy that led into the crisis, and indeed how it was so easy for some people to blame the EU. And we saw this in Greece in particular. And it was remarkable for me, the space of 10 years. 10 years ago, there was horrendous depictions of Angela Merkel hanging on graffiti and posters around Dublin, you know, blaming her for all the austerity. You roll on Brexit, and she is our queen in shining armor that has shown the solidarity to ensure that we keep our border open, to ensure that there is a Brexit adjustment fund of which Ireland will receive a quarter of the value of. So, as I said, the easiest thing is to blame, but the fact that we now have these Eurobonds, we now have the potential, not just for when this pandemic subsides and the economic fallout is going to end up in an arena in Dragos's committee, but also for the next crisis, and looking for the next ability for all the remaining 27 member states. And I must say, I very much hope in the next couple of years, we're not talking about an EU of 27, but an EU of 28, 29 or 30, because the stronger we have the continent as a whole, and that includes perhaps the UK coming back, the stronger we have that level of solidarity, the better it is.
Or Scotland.
Or indeed Scotland, but I wouldn't dare get weighed into that battle. That's for other people to decide.
I'm just trying to stir it up there, Neil. And just to make you feel a little bit worse, Ireland are 6 points to 0 down in the rugby, just in case you haven't got it in the corner of your eye. Dragos, can I bring you in, please, as someone who sits on Irena's Econ Committee? How important was the decision, the EU's decision, to suspend the usual budgetary rules, the 3% deficit rule, in the middle of the crisis? I think it was April or May last year.
I mean, it was clearly something that was done based on the reality of the economic situation in the member states. So I would say that it would have been outrageous if, you know, the Commission and the EU would have reacted to that. The kind of expenditure needed for dealing with the pandemics, be that, you know, trying to preserve some of the jobs, trying to create some cushions for the vulnerable categories, the kind of investment that was put into the health sector, in education and in many other fields of activity. I mean, I believe that it was quite clear in terms of the budgetary impact of this expenditure that countries, member states, wouldn't be able to stay in the 3%. So what is happening right now is that we have this thing which is called the general escape clause, allowing the member states basically to do whatever it takes for the sake of protecting the citizens during the pandemic. So it's just a natural thing. And then, of course, there will be an important debate to figure out, as Commissioner Gentiloni was referring, if we are talking about coming back to the regular system of macroeconomic prudentiality starting with 2022, or we are going to see how the member states and countries are actually faring and decide what kind of other system we are going to have to revert to the old principles. But right now, everything has actually changed, and even in my own country, in Romania, the government is on one hand fighting to get down the budget deficit. We are actually aiming for 2021 to have it at 7% after the skyrocketing last year to 9+. There will be it will take some years to get it back actually to 3% or to the range that is considered by macroeconomists an equilibrium range. So it's quite important to see how fast we are going to do. Is this W pattern in terms of recovery? It will be a V pattern. I mean, who knows? I mean, there are a lot of discussions going on.
A square root pattern, perhaps?
Exactly.
You know,
volatility.
now while I have you, Dragos, I'm going to put a question to you that's been given in from the audience using the Slido function. We have a question from Remy Trovo. His question, and I'll give it to you, Dragos, but I could distribute it further if you don't want to handle it. But you seem like a kind of guy who'd be able to handle any question, so I'm going to throw it at you. Healthcare is a brand new competence for the Commission. First of all, some people dispute whether it is a competence, but anyway, how confident is the panel that it will be able to effectively take on this new responsibility? First of all, Dragos, would you say that healthcare is now a competency of the EU?
That is the, thin ice of the treaties. I mean, nothing has actually changed. This has actually been put forward in the treaties. But we've managed to, using the treaties, to define, union-wide competencies, and this EU for Health program that we are having and the interventions that we had on vaccination and so on. This actually has actually proven that the EU should be more active in this particular field. So in terms of competencies, not necessarily EU competence, but in terms of actively engaging at union level on the health field, at the margin of the maximum that treaty allows. I mean, we are having that, and the European Parliament has actually fought a lot for having a budget, that would live to the expectations and the ambitions that we want to have for the next years. Now, what will happen in the future with that? Obviously, there will be the Conference on the Future of Europe, and there are quite a few political actors that will say maybe health and maybe even education and some other fields should be things that we should talk about in terms of the competence at European level. Who knows? This is an unfolding discussion, but I will actually praise the question, because this is a question about how Europe will actually evolve in the next years.
Okay, Irene, I'm going to come to you now with the next one it's the same kind of question about healthcare competency. And I say that because we saw what can be done when you can negotiate as one bloc rather than, tiny Malta trying to compete with very rich Germany, et cetera, et cetera. But at the moment, we've got 27 different health regulators, 27 different chief medical advisors, 27 different healthcare systems. And my favorite, Irena, is quarantine. The original Italian word meant 40 days. But in some countries, it's 14 days. In some countries, it's 10 days. In some countries, it's 7 days. So in many ways, could the European Union not at least agree on what quarantine should be?
Well, yes, the management of healthcare and the real competence, of course, remains by the treaty and and by all the different national constitutions remain in national competency. But as you said, of course, the European Union could agree on standards that are the same. The problem, I think, at the very beginning was that nobody really knew how much time. It was not clear. I mean, the pandemic came completely unexpected, and even the experts were not sure exactly about all the possible ways and times of the contagion. So different countries had their different task force and panels of experts, and honestly, yes, there was a little bit of confusion, and there was an heterogeneity that we could probably try to overcome for the future. So now we have European guidelines, for example, on the vaccination plan. Actually, we have pretty homogeneous guidelines that the European Union put forward. Of course, every country has the freedom to decide how to deploy the vaccination plan. But more or less, what I see, for example, is that more or less they all follow the same pattern, like vaccinating, medical personnel and senior people, more fragile categories. All of these, were the European guidelines. So we are following a very similar protocol in how we are vaccinating. But of course, at the beginning for the quarantine, for example, that was very confusing, but that we also adapted. We started out with a very long quarantine. I'm talking about Italy, for example. Then it was down to 2 weeks. Then it was like 10 days. But because it was learning by doing, unfortunately, this is a problem we all had to deal with.
I'm going to go to our second poll now. A lot of you have already voted on this, and it's basically our theme today. You can vote on the right-hand side now if you haven't already done so. A lot of you already have. The question is simply this: has COVID-19 damaged European unity? The answers so far is 54% say yes. Now, I know the three of you are fairly keen on European unity, and you may disagree with it, but that's the view of our very clever audience. They're either doing degrees or doing masters or PhDs. They're pretty bright bunch of people. So that's their view, that it has been damaged. Irina, can I stay with you? I was lucky enough to grab 4 days in Italy in August. 4 whole days. That's the only time I left the country in 2020. And it was great to see people wearing their masks and people being very fastidious. I just wonder whether the European Union was wise, or whether the Italian government was wise, and other governments, especially in Greece and Spain, to encourage the opening up of the tourist markets, given what we now know, i.e. a massive second wave and a massive second lockdown. Were they wise, or was that a little bit short term? Irene.
Well, I
I'm
don't
giving
know.
you easy questions, Irene, easy questions.
No, it is not that easy, in the sense that I'm afraid that actually we saw a very harsh second wave, even in countries that are not so touristy. We saw, for example, a devastating second wave in Germany that was completely unexpected. If you think about how the first wave was, more limited and contained and well managed, and despite that, the second wave was very, very bad. So, in Italy, we reopened, but in a very cautious way. It wasn't everybody was wearing a mask. Every single store or restaurant had very severe measures for distancing, for sanitization, for I think that ultimately, rather than the opening up of the borders, I think it's more on the individual's behavior. So it is possible that during the summer, people, regardless of whether or not the borders and the tourism was more intense or not, people felt during the summer in different countries that maybe they could relax a little bit in their behavior. And these unfortunately led to a second wave, but I'm not so sure that it was exclusively related to the tourism, because it was done with the extreme attention. And what we see actually in the second wave affected even countries that were not so open during the tourist session. But I don't know. It is difficult, and you know what? In Italy, we have a way, but I think different countries have the same way of saying that it's too easy to judge ex post, something like that. To be smarty after things have happened. In Spain they say it's too easy to handle the bull not from the arena, but from the seats on the side,
So I think every country has a phrase that. In Ireland, they call it a hurler on the ditch, or in America, they call it a Monday morning quarterback. You're all very wise after the fact.
I like that.
So let's go to Neil Richmond in Ireland, and he is doubtless watching the rugby, and he will have noticed that Ireland are now in the lead against Wales. So I will keep you informed of the score, Neil, if you stay with us. The Irish government pushed for a reopening or a loosening of the lockdown over Christmas. That has now proven to be a disaster, hasn't it? there has been a huge surge in numbers and a huge surge in deaths in Ireland, which had up to that point avoided the massive surge in death toll that we saw across the Irish Sea in Britain.
Yeah, look, Ireland in the space of probably a fortnight went from best in class to worst in class in Europe. And that is the nature, as Irina was very eloquently saying, about this virus. And when you talk about the aspect of unity, Joe, of course, at the start of the pandemic, we had the rally to the flag, you know, people going out in the balconies, clapping, beautiful operatic performances in Italy, things like that. But what country, what entity is near as united now? Certainly not the UK when you see the reaction to vaccine rollout in Scotland. Look what's going on in the US, Brazil, it's all around the world. It's even a huge topic in New Zealand, the supposed model. But huge mistakes were made by every administration, because this is what you have to get back to. And it's something that I think the hot takers, as we call them in Irish society, lose sight of this. You're dealing with a pandemic of a virus that is just over a year old. You know, this time last year, we were on in election day in Ireland. No one had heard of this virus. I certainly didn't think my first year as a member of parliament would be focused on this. I thought it would solely be the Brexit hangover. And yet we are reacting and dealing with it as best possible. Doctors make mistakes, politicians make mistakes. The data that was presented to the Irish government leading into Christmas, and a lot of people post-Christmas said it's all the government's fault. They were basically wanting you to apologise for killing people. And I think that's a bit extreme. Because at the end of the day, you may have loosened restrictions on hospitality and home visits, but then there are human nature kicks in and people goes 100 times. Even today, I have people going like, oh, well, so-and-so's in my bubble. A bubble is, you know, 2 people who live on their own, not 3 households. And I think this is the human nature thing that no politician, no administrator, no chief medical officer can control. And the ability to get any sort of agreement on this island of Ireland alone on strategy, never mind across 27 member states in the EU, is proving quite difficult.
Can I add one thing, Joe?
Irina, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I apologize, but just, you know, when you are a policy maker, whether at the national, but especially at the national level, and you have to balance different things. You have to balance the healthcare crisis, but you also have to take into consideration the social situation, how people react to what you are doing. And people were very brave and disciplined, and I say the first few months, but we also started to see riots on the streets after a few months. You have to take into consideration what happens economically to businesses and try to hold everything together in making sure that you are providing the strongest response on the healthcare side, but at the same time, not completely destroying the social fabric, the economic fabric, making sure people can resist that kind of situation. It's so difficult. And that's why it's difficult also to judge afterwards the decisions that have been made. For sure, there have been mistakes, but trying to balance all these different things, try to hold the society together to you know, it's a long process, because also we don't know exactly how long we will have to hold this, how long we will have to have the lockdown. And every time we say we probably will finish next month, and then becomes 2 months and 3 months and 6 months. And now we think that we might wait the next year before we have, you know, a full coverage, and people have to resist that. It's not easy. It's really very complicated.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Dragos. You can unmute yourself, Dragos. I got a question here given in from the audience. Again, don't forget to post your questions using the Slido. And don't forget, if you're going to tweet or LinkedIn or whatever, the hashtag is WES 2021 or hashtag join the debate. For you, Dragos, from Alexander Vuros, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, kind of Germanic Greek. Are Germany and France too dominant in the EU? Now, we have no Germans or no French on the panel. I'm sure we have in the audience, and I'd be interested to hear their views. But Alexander sounds German, and he's asking whether his own country and France are too dominant in the EU. Dragos, easy one for you.
I mean, if they are dominant or not, I mean, let me just think about, you know, who has been leading the decisions, the recent decisions that we had. And I mean, we are here in a panel which was, also organized with the support of the European Parliament. And I will need to say that if you look at the majorities on the files that were about, the reaction to the pandemic, you've seen majorities that you haven't seen in the past. So the unity in between the first four groups, EPP, SND, Renew, and the Greens, just to mention the first four, I mean, not, some positive votes from the others as well. I mean, that was amazing. Even in Econ Budge, we had something like 78 out of 90, for instance, the approval for the RRF thing. So, I mean, I would like to say that these votes are not coming just from France and Germany. This is something going on, and that's going across politics, which is something that is also serving as a rebuttal for the more than half of our viewers that believe that our unity is actually weakened. I would say that the kind of response that we've seen at the European level and if someone is analyzing the majorities, would actually suggest a different view. And I would also say that even if obviously France and Germany are critical to push some of the decision forward, they are not right now deciding the path forward. So it's not anymore that France and Germany are deciding something and then all the others are following. I would say that the process right now is a process that it's much more, let's say, multi-stakeholder rather than in the past. Obviously, everyone is looking to see who is going to follow Angela Merkel in Germany. Everyone is also looking at if Emmanuel Macron is going to be able to surpass its own problem in France. But I mean, I would dare to say that the future looks a little bit brighter because right now we are mobilizing together. And I mean, the European Parliament has actually been quite a divided institution in the past. I mean, I'm not saying that we are hugging on the corridors, all of us, all the,
I hope you aren't. I hope you're not.
But I'm just suggesting that it's not, even if it's not love in the air all the time in the reverse. I mean, I would definitely say that things are going better in terms of taking decisions together, at least for the unity of a response against the pandemics.
Thank you very much. Neil, you might want to unmute yourself. Question for you. It's from a lady called Karina. She just floated in this question. And you, of course, have done battle with many a Brexiteer in your time, one of whom was probably David Davis, who was the Brexit secretary in the United Kingdom once Britain had voted to leave. Karina's question is, during the Warwick Economics Summit, David Davis said one of his main reasons for supporting Brexit was the lack of support for Greece from the European Union. This is David Davis's words. How do you ensure the attractiveness of the EU and to prevent this kind of thing happening again? Neil.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, David Davis is trying to rewrite history. He's saying, like, I was a reluctant Remainer, but the treatment of Greece turned me into a leaver. David Davis was always a leaver. He was always a Eurosceptic, and trying to portray yourself in hindsight is not a good look for a politician. But I think it is one of the huge issues, and that's why I'm so glad we have the future of Europe, and why we're talking about now Eurobonds and European solidarity, is we have to look at all the member states. We look at the reasons why the UK left, and to be honest, they were quite unique. I don't think any other member state would have left for the same sort of reasons. But if you look at other member states where you sometimes see a rise of Euroscepticism, again, for me, it's the easy option. You have to address those concerns. And one of the huge issues, it's twofold. The responsibility is first actually on the European Commission. My late father was a sales rep, traveling salesman, selling roofing on the road. And one thing for me, the European Commission really does not do very well is sell itself. It's great at providing funding and schemes where people can inform themselves about the union and, more importantly, learn how to give out about it, but they never actually go back to the basic wins. What's the huge achievement that people were talking about the last couple of years? Data roaming. The EU is so much more than that, and the Commission needs to step up there. But this is one that's particular to me, and Dragos might have some sympathy from it, is that it's also a responsibility of member state politicians. It's so easy for us, if something we don't like, we blame Brussels. If there's something we like, we claim responsibility for it. And I think that was very, very true in Greece and the other programme countries like Ireland, where domestic politicians didn't step up and take responsibility and didn't give praise where it was well earned. And that's why when we talk about European unity at the times of COVID, a lot of people have rightly stood up at the outset and said, well, you know, we are seeing that cross-border solidarity. We are seeing our health ministers and our experts talking. We are seeing that common procurement of both in PPE and vaccines, ventilators from Ireland. They're going 10 a penny. It's great business as well as everything else. But more importantly, what we're now starting to creep in is people are going like, well, maybe we'll start to blame the EU for vaccine rollouts when it's a member state competence. They have the vaccines, but the system of actually rolling out the vaccines, you know, it's the responsibility of my government, and I'm a government TD, and my Minister for Health. They'll get the vaccines from the European Union, essentially paid for. And I think that's really something quite important. And we have to take that going forward, that we involve the member states far more, particularly the parliamentarians, backbenchers like me, involve them in the process when we're discussing the future of Europe. And therefore, we'll be able to address, and it's a word I hate, despite being such a Europhile, we'll address the supposed deficit when it comes to subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity. How long do we go before we mention subsidiarity? Okay, well done for waiting an hour and 3 minutes, and Neil, for that. Irena, can I put a question to you, please? It's from Miami. Now, I don't know whether this person is actually in Florida or whether that's their name, but that's what we have from Miami. I'm assuming there is some really warm part in the southern states. But anyway, question is in relation to Sweden. Don't ever pretend we don't kind of spread the questions around the continent here. Here's a nice Nordic question for you. Do you think Sweden's unique strategy in respect to their lack of restrictions has affected the mindset of populations in other countries in the EU? Now, I think it's quite a good question because a lot of COVID skeptics, put it that way, or lockdown skeptics say, well, look at the Swedes. Why can't we be like the Swedes? Irena, what do you think?
Well, of course, when you have different responses in different countries, like, for example, now everybody says, look at Israel for the vaccination program, look at the UK. I mean, it's always, when you are in a moment of great difficulty, you always try to look at what other countries have done and see if maybe it was better than what your own country is doing. And especially, you know, the lockdown was very unpopular, and we have to say. But I think that, for example, in my country, of course, there were some people that looked at that, but it was also, there was the awareness that after all, every country has its own specificity. And Sweden is a very, very small country with a much lower density than the one that countries like Italy or Spain or Germany have. So a completely different demographic and social conditions, different structure. I mean, in Italy, it would be really difficult. We have entire families living together with the grandparents, and we needed a stricter conditions. And we couldn't really look at that kind of model, which, you know, by the way, I'm not sure that proved so successful in the end. But the conditions were so different that indeed it was difficult to make a comparison. But of course, in difficult circumstances, or how can I say, the grass of the of the neighbor is always a little bit greener, you know.
Okay, Irena, grazie. And as someone who is married to a Nordic, the joke that I love telling her and her friends is that the Nordics absolutely loved the 2-meter distance rule. They would prefer a 10-meter distance rule from other human beings. Whereas the Italians and the Irish, as someone who knows both countries, hated it because they love whispering gossip in each other's ears. Anyway, so Dragos, I'm sure the Romanians are also Latin in that respect. I'm sure they hate the 2-meter rule as well. Dragos, can I come to you with a question? And it's to do with the recovery, the post-pandemic world. We have mass unemployment beckoning. We have major economic difficulties, huge debts. Is there a chance that the recovery from COVID-19 could water down the European Union's other big aspiration and big goal, and that is to decarbonize the economy entirely?
I would dare to say, au contraire. I mean, I would say that right now, if there is something that everyone seems to be committed on, would be the Green Deal. I mean, the green transition and the digital transformation. So, I mean, let me start with the digital. I'm going to go back to the green immediately. The digital, we had a lot of bad things during the crisis, but for digital, I mean, this has actually increased or fastened it made actually faster the acceptance of digital in the society. I think we gain about 5 years in terms of acceptance from the society of digital in our lives, be that shopping, education, work remotely, and many other aspects, public administration.
I hate homeschooling. Can I just say, Dragos, I hate homeschooling. I want to get back to actual schooling. Neil, I think, agrees with me, but I am about to fall out with my 7-year-old because of homeschooling.
I am with you. I have 4 kids, all of them in school. So, I mean, don't mention it, Joe. Don't mention it. I mean, I'm just trying
I hate it. Teachers, I love you. Teachers, I love you.
Yeah. Okay. And the argument for the green, it's about resources, and it's about the fact that we are going to have a situation in which we need to revamp our supply chains in Europe. And if we do that, we should actually take care of the circular economy aspect as well. And we should take care about the energy supply as well. So I would say that I'm not seeing at all that the crisis is going to influence our capacity to deliver on green. But the other way around, the RRF is actually focused on that. You know that 37% of the RRF is going to be dedicated to the Green Deal. So I'm expecting a huge effort to happen across the Union. All member states will actually issue their plans, in which, again, more than 1/3 would actually be dedicated to the Green Deal. So I mean, we don't have just the stick, we just have a big carrot right now to be used for that. And I think that is quite important.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to go to Neil in Dublin with a final question from our audience. Neil, and I might share this question then with the other panelists as well. Some members have failed to address investments on the youth in their recovery plans. Is the EU going to take measures in order to push members in that direction? In other words, invest in younger people disproportionately to the rest of the economy? And I think Dragos made a reference to the digital transformation and how that was concertinaed into a very short time frame last year. Neil, investment in the youth, are we doing enough as part of the recovery?
No, certainly not. This may be a slightly philosophical answer, Joe, but I know we're getting to the end of the session. Our young people of today, the secondary school, the high school students, the university students, are being robbed of every opportunity that the likes of us took for granted. And I'm not just talking about the opportunity to have in-school tuition, the life-changing moments, the chance to go interrailing, to meet a first love, to go to a disco, whatever it is, without sounding too cheesy or creepy. And I think once we start to move out of this pandemic, we owe a great debt to the young people who've sucked it up. For a large part of the pandemic, particularly in Ireland, a lot of people, when they were going around seeking to blame, were talking about house parties and kids congregating in green spaces or in housing estates, and it was really unfair. Especially if you're a teenager, and my kids are very young, they don't have a clue what's going on. They haven't gone through any big crises before. So the responsibility then on public policy makers is to recognize that not only does it make economic sense to front load any sort of investment into younger people, be it in terms of training or opportunities, the Interrail Discovery Programme that the European Parliament brought about a couple of years ago, but really finance that to maximize Erasmus Plus opportunities. I think there is a societal debt owed to our younger generation, as well as an economic justification for it.
I think that's something that we all possibly agree on. I certainly remember when I was in university, and if I've been told, no, you've got to stay at home for a year, I might have exploded. Irena, you probably agree with much of what Neil has just said.
Absolutely, absolutely, and actually, I know I only have a couple of minutes. But I would like to remind that in our negotiations for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and together with Dragos, we were fighting very hard because youth and the next generation were included as one of the pillars on which the money would be invested. Now it's upon the member states, but we really try to include it in a very strong and explicit way, because we are all aware that all over Europe there is an underinvestment in the next generations and in youth, maybe because of our demographic structure, maybe because of our, the welfare that is more unbalanced towards the older age and pensions and retirement rather than younger ages. But we need to revert this, because this crisis will be particularly heavy on the younger generations, even in terms of future occupational perspectives. So we really need to revert this trend. We are trying to push. Dragos was very, very good in these negotiations. I can testify that we negotiated that together. So maybe he wants to say, yeah.
Well, Dragos, I will leave you the final word if you want to unmute yourself and give us your final thoughts on that, on taking up what Neil has just said.
I mean, the next generation and the investment in children and youth is one of the biggest win of the parliament. And Irene and the entire negotiation team, again, was together with me on this thing. We came with that as early in June, I think, from the European Parliament side. And we thought it underway, and the council actually accepted it. So right now we have a pillar in the RRF on that. And I believe that it's not just that, it's the pure recognition that if you call a program Next Generation EU, it shouldn't be an ironical reference to who is going to pay the bill. It should be about investing in the ones that will actually ensure the success of the union in the past. So having the youth and the children believing in the EU project is actually critical to the success of Europe in the past. For us, it will be, something to leave as a legacy. For the ones that are actually watching us and the children that are coming after them, it will be their Europe to shape. And we should actually be quite proud in investing in the future of tomorrow. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our panel, Neil Richmond from the Irish Parliament, Irena Tignagli from the Econ Committee in the European Parliament, Dragos Pislaru also from the Econ Committee and the Employment Committee in the European Parliament. Thank you to the European Parliament itself for making this happen, especially Daniel Radcliffe. Stay tuned for the rest of the Warwick Economics Summit. We're coming to the close now. There's a very interesting discussion with Judith Polgar. And if you watch, as I did, The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, I loved it, you'll be very interested in that particular discussion. My name is Joe Lynham. Stay tuned. There's a lot more to discuss, but from all of us in this panel, have a great day, and let's hope this vaccine gets into our arms as soon as possible. Goodbye.